For Australia, this attack on Saudi Arabia is particularly significant. And that's not just because our petrol prices may now go up, depending on how fast Saudi Arabia gets that refinery back into gear, but it's also because 3 Australians are in Iranian jails on what seems to be totally fake suspicion or charges of being spies. Now, they are Kylie Moore-Gilbert, a Melbourne University lecturer in Islamic studies, who's reportedly been given a 10-year sentence. And then there's travel bloggers Jolie King and Mark Firkin, who flew a drone when they camped in Iran. They're in jail too. Joining me is Australia's finest writer on foreign affairs, Greg Sheridan of the Australian newspaper. Now, first of all, just back to the question I put to the previous guest, can we actually be sure that Iran is behind this attack?
Look, I think it's probably most likely, but the administration will have to give us a bit more evidence if they're going to do anything in retaliation. My guess would be they probably won't do anything in retaliation. I would say, Andrew, I think Trump has handled Iran pretty badly. I think the key moment was when he ordered a military strike in retaliation for Iran shooting down an American drone and then aborted the military strike. Now, Trump's prudence in the use of force is, in many ways, an admirable thing. But after 2.5 years now, I think America's adversaries are working him out, really. He's kind of a right-wing Barack Obama, you know. The threat is there, the follow-through is not.
Yeah, but Barack Obama did go to war on Libya, and I think Trump probably wants to go to the election as the first president for a very, very long time that hasn't started a war.
Fair
so
enough,
who knows?
But I think it's a tremendous mistake to say you're going to do something as a president and then not do it. By all means, if you don't want to do it, say so right at the start. I mean, the worst moment in Obama's presidency was when he said to Syria, if you use chemical weapons, you cross a red line and I'm going to smack you. And then he said, guess what, I was only kidding. Well, Trump kind of did the same thing with the drone. He said, you've shot down a drone. I'm going to tell you, you can't treat America that way. Watch
Planes
out.
in the air.
Planes in the air. I guess what, I was only kidding, fellas. And I think we're getting a pattern now with Trump. He escalates his rhetoric, then he negotiates, feeling that that's given him terrific coin, and then he likes to announce an outcome. But there's no case where that has actually led to anything.
Kim Jong-un would be feeling much safer in Pyongyang at the moment.
Well, I think on North Korea, Trump has taken us backwards. I think we're much worse off as a result of all this palaver.
All right, well, how should the US respond? Because we're talking about a very dangerous adversary here in Iran.
It may be that doing nothing is the right thing, but it may be that exacting a cost. I think this is such a serious... See, the other problem with Trump is that his rhetoric is always at maximum volume. A gifted writer like you knows that you have piano passages and fortissimo passages. He's always...
I'm from Dutch background. I only type with clogs on.
Yeah, well,
there is no pianissimo.
Trump is always full throttle. So this is much more serious than shooting down an American drone. So perhaps this deserves retaliation. But you've got to establish that the Iranians actually did it. There is another theory that it may have been done by Iranian forces in Iraq or Iranian-based forces. Be the same difference, but if it's done by Iranian proxies, that's slightly different from being done by Iran.
All right. Well, how should Australia respond? Because we have got 3 people in their jails, and you've written this, I think, last week, that essentially Iran takes hostage prisoners.
Yeah, Iran is the chief practitioner of hostage diplomacy with North Korea and China. And I think the Australian government is a bit irresponsible. I think our travel advisory should simply say, don't travel to Iran. Don't travel to Iran. It's very foolish to have any hint of ambiguity in your travel advice to a country which routinely practices hostage diplomacy. And incidentally, I know we're not on this topic, but I just can't tell you how much I agree with you in criticising the government for trying to make a racial case out of criticism of Gladys Liu.
Well, it's interesting you say that, because I would like to segue into that, because I think there is some common elements here, and it's this. You mentioned the government playing the race card in the debate about Liberal MP Gladys Liu and her connections to the Communist Chinese regime. Now, the 2 Australian travel bloggers that Iran has now jailed, Jolie King and Mark Firkin, they said their biggest motivation behind their vlogs, their video blogs, was to inspire anyone wanting to travel, and also to try to break the stigma around travelling to countries which get a bad rap in the media. Now, Greg, to me, this is just one small example of a naivety in Australian travellers that I first noticed when I was a backpacker, thinking all countries are nice, and also this exaggerated fear of seeming racist in criticising anyone from those countries, which leads us to these two people being in Iranian prison, and also the government playing the race card with some effect. The idea to criticise a Chinese Australian, oh my goodness me, and how could anyone be so mean about the Chinese regime?
Yeah, look, I think you're dead right here, Andrew. I think you're dead right on both cases. I don't blame these poor bloggers because they're young and they're probably stupid. And God bless them, there's nothing wrong with them. They're not wicked. I do blame the government because the advice should have said, don't go to Iran under any circumstances, because otherwise you're going to always have Australians there who are potential hostages. On the Gladys Liu matter, I think there's no clear evidence that she has done anything wicked, but she certainly needs to explain her association with these Chinese front bodies, and she needs to explain more about her fundraising activities. Greg,
you tell me any other candidate that you know of, there wasn't even a member, in fact, a member of Parliament, she wasn't even a candidate at the time, that raised $1 million for their political party.
I agree. But the point I want to get onto is I'm really disappointed in the government's defence here. What they've done is they'll say, we'll play by the rules of the left and we'll be the left when we can. So I haven't heard anyone make a racial criticism of Gladys Liu. She seems a nice woman. I think she looks like she's done some, you know, silly things, and saying on your program first that she wasn't a member of this organisation, then she couldn't remember it, and then she was after all. Any politician would be criticised for that. Now, when the Liberals were criticising Labor connections, it was Labor who was saying you're being racist, and they tried to run this in the Bennelong by-election in particular. I wrote columns criticising the Labor Party. I said, you are creating racial hostility where there is no racial hostility. Now the government is doing this. I think it's cynical and tawdry and unworthy of the government and damaging to Australia.
I think it's extremely damaging because we already see some Chinese spokesmen, and some of them may well be aligned to the Beijing dictatorships and in their interests, who are already saying, you're just picking on Chinese, which is exactly what the Beijing regime would like people to believe. Any question of their influence here is just racism.
And what a terrible message to send to our normal Chinese Australian. The regime in Beijing has no claim over a Chinese Australian. I'm not going to regard an Australian Chinese or an Australian of Chinese ancestry with suspicion, nor am I going to say I can't criticise them because of their ethnicity. That is absurd. And the government has gone into the swamp of identity politics, I think, in a very destructive fashion.
It's essentially saying that all Chinese here really are supporters of the communist regime, which is in fact a tyranny that few Australians actually realise, you know, how sinister it really is. Greg Sheridan, thank you so much for your time.
Thanks, Andrew.